The waitress who paid for a stranger's meal with her last few dollars, unaware he was a secret billionaire who would change her life forever. "This isn't a real one," the waitress whispered, her voice a soft hush of apology, her fingers trembling slightly as they gestured toward the crisp, almost too perfect banknote on the polished marble counter. The pounding rain hammered against the large glass windows of the small trattoria, a relentless, desperate rhythm that echoed the frantic thudding in Elena's own chest. Each droplet that slid down the pane seemed to carry with it a fragment of her dwindling hope, streaking the golden glow from the street lamps into blurry, distorted lines of light. She drew in a slow, weary breath, the air thick with the scent of garlic, oregano, and the damp wool of her thin cardigan, a threadbare shield against the biting cold that seeped in through the door every time a customer departed. The worn fabric felt rough against her skin, a constant reminder of her fragile state. Her eyes, the color of faded forget-me-nots, were haunted, carrying a depth of sorrow that seemed too vast for her delicate frame. She was a ghost in her own life, moving through the motions with a quiet, dignified grace that belied the desperation gnawing at her soul. Every clink of cutlery, every burst of laughter from the warm, well-fed patrons, felt like a world away from the sterile silence of her own small, cold apartment. She was stranded on an island of poverty, watching the ships of fortune sail by on a distant horizon. It was a profound and unbearable loneliness. She clutched the counterfeit bill. It was worthless. The customer, a woman of severe elegance with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes into a permanent state of disapproval, scoffed, her disdain a palpable force in the cozy restaurant. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the woman's sharp features for a split second, casting deep shadows under her cheekbones and making her look like a cruel gargoyle carved from stone. Elena felt her own posture shrink, her shoulders curling inward as if to protect the raw, exposed nerve of her vulnerability from the woman's piercing gaze. Her heart, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of her ribs, pounded against her sternum, each beat a reminder of her powerlessness. The woman's name was Isabella, and she was more than just a difficult customer. She was a specter from a life that had been shattered, the mother of the husband Elena had lost, the grandmother of the son she was now failing to provide for. Isabella saw Elena not as a grieving widow, but as the architect of her own son's demise, a stain on their family's proud name. The silence in the small space between them deepened, heavy and suffocating. "You are accusing me of fraud?" Isabella hissed, her voice low and sharp, a weapon designed to inflict maximum damage. Elena flinched as if struck. She just wanted the night to end. Elena's initial state was one of quiet, dignified desperation. Her life had become a precarious balancing act, a tightrope walk over a chasm of financial ruin. Her husband, Marco, a man with a laugh like summer thunder and eyes that held the whole sky, had been taken from her in a sudden, brutal car accident 2 years prior. He had been her anchor, her warmth, her future. Now all she had left of him was their 5-year-old son, Leo, a small, pale boy with his father's eyes and a cough that had settled deep in his chest, a persistent, rattling sound that was the soundtrack to her sleepless nights. The doctor had prescribed medicine, an expensive bottle of liquid that now sat half empty on their kitchen counter, a testament to her dwindling funds. Her job as a waitress at Trattoria di Sofia was her only lifeline, but the tips were meager, her wages barely enough to cover the rent on their damp, third-floor walk-up where the heating was fickle and the shadows in the corners seemed to grow larger each day. She possessed an immense, unwavering inner strength, a pure resolve to protect her son, but she had no material resources left to draw upon. The eviction notice was already tucked beneath the sugar bowl on her small kitchen table, a crisp, official declaration of her failure. Her despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making each breath a conscious effort. Yet, she moved with a gentle, steady purpose, her love for Leo a sacred flame she protected against the howling winds of her misfortune. She was exhausted. One particularly bleak Tuesday, the rain returned with a vengeance, turning the city into a watercolor painting of gray and black. The restaurant was nearly empty, The few occupied tables islands of warmth in a sea of vacant chairs. Elena moved between them, her smile a fragile but sincere offering. The soft click of the front door opening drew her attention. A man stood silhouetted against the storm-lashed street, water dripping from the hem of his long, dark coat, forming a small puddle on the worn tile floor. He looked utterly lost, his shoulders slumped not just with weariness, but with a grief so profound it seemed to have hollowed him out from the inside. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed and distant, as if he were looking at a world he no longer recognized. He was, to the world, a man of no consequence, another soul battered by the storm of life. He was Alessandro Valenti, a name that commanded boardrooms and moved markets, a billionaire whose empire was built on steel and innovation. But that Alessandro had vanished 6 months ago, on the same night a fiery crash on a coastal highway had claimed his wife, Sophia, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Now, he was just a man, adrift in a cavernous silence, his wealth a mountain of useless, glittering dust. His grief was a physical presence, a biting cold that no amount of money could warm. He wore his disguise of ordinariness like a shroud. He froze. He took a seat at a small table in the corner, a space cloaked in flickering light from a single candle. He barely looked at the menu Elena offered, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the rain-streaked window. He ordered a simple bowl of pasta, his voice raspy from disuse. Elena felt a strange, unspoken kinship with this stranger. She recognized the shape of his sorrow. It was the same hollow ache that lived in her own chest. She served him his meal with a gentle touch, ensuring his water glass was full, offering him a basket of warm bread he didn't touch. She watched him from across the room as he ate, his movements slow, mechanical, as if the simple act of lifting a fork required a monumental effort. He was a shattered man. When he finished, he motioned for the check. Elena brought it to him on a small plate. He reached into his coat, his hand searching his pockets, a frown slowly creasing his brow. A look of mild panic, then deep, weary embarrassment, crossed his features. I seem to have lost my wallet, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't meet her eyes. The humiliation was a fresh, sharp pain on top of the dull, chronic ache of his loss. He looked so brittle, so fragile. It felt to Elena like a harsh word might cause him to splinter into 1,000 pieces. This was the moment, the pivot point on which her entire future would unknowingly turn. Elena's mind raced. In her apron pocket were $43 in tips. It was the money for the refill of Leo's prescription. It was the money for milk and bread. It was quite literally all she had in the world until her next shift. The internal hesitation was a sharp, painful pang of self-preservation. Leo's pale face and rattling cough flashed in her mind. The stark white of the eviction notice. Her heart clenched. But then she looked at the man. She saw the raw, unbearable pain in his eyes, the same pain she saw in the mirror every morning. She saw a fellow sufferer, a member of the silent brotherhood of the grieving. Her own hardship had not hardened her. It had tenderized her heart, making it more susceptible to the suffering of others. Her inherent goodness, a pure and selfless instinct, overwhelmed her fear. She knew what it felt like to be alone and helpless. She could not add to this man's burden. Not today. She gave him a small, reassuring smile, a gesture of sincere, unpitying solidarity. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. Her voice was steady. She took the check from his table. Walking to the register, she pulled the crumpled bills from her apron, the money that represented her son's comfort, her own survival. With trembling fingers, she rang up the man's meal and paid for it herself. The act was performed quietly, without fanfare, a secret between her and the cold, indifferent machine. The personal cost was immense, a seismic sacrifice. It felt like tearing off a piece of her own soul. But as the drawer clicked shut, a strange sense of peace settled over her. It was the right thing to do. She walked back to the man's table. He was watching her, his hollow eyes filled with a stunned, uncomprehending light. He had spent the last 6 months in a transactional world where every interaction was a negotiation. Every gesture had a price. This quiet, unsolicited act of kindness, from a woman who clearly had so little, was like a stone dropped into the stagnant, silent pool of his grief. The ripples were profound. It was the first genuine human connection he had felt since the accident. It reawakened something in him, a flicker of a heart he thought had died. He was in awe. He was intrigued. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. Elena simply shook her head. "Everyone has a bad day," she replied. She reached into her apron pocket again, her fingers closing around a small, smooth object. It was a little wooden bird, its paint worn from years of being held. It had been Marco's good luck charm, a silly trinket he'd carried everywhere. After his death, she had carried it, a tangible link to him. Now she felt a strange compulsion. She placed the wooden bird on the table next to his hand. "Here," she said, her voice barely audible over the hammering rain. "This brought my husband luck. Maybe it will bring you some, too." It was an offering of a sacred memory, a piece of her shattered past given to a stranger. The man stared at the bird, then up at her, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. A raw, undeniable connection formed in that silent exchange. He picked up the bird, its smooth, worn texture a shock of warmth against his cold skin. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. He nodded, unable to speak. He stood up, wrapped his coat around himself, and walked out into the storm, clutching the wooden bird in his hand. He vanished into the night. She was alone again. The immediate consequence of her selfless act was severe. The next morning, Leo's cough was worse, a harsh, barking sound that tore at Elena's heart. She went to the pharmacy, her purse empty, her hope a flickering candle flame. The pharmacist looked at her with pity as she explained she couldn't afford the refill. She left with nothing but the weight of her failure pressing down on her. That afternoon, the landlord, a man with a face like a clenched fist, knocked on her door. He didn't need to say a word. The final eviction notice he handed her was colder and sharper than any insult. She had 3 days to vacate the premises. Despair, a familiar and unwelcome guest, settled back into the room, draping itself over the worn furniture and casting long shadows. She held Leo close, his small body hot with fever, and rocked him gently, humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing. She thought of the stranger from the restaurant. A part of her, the logical, frightened part, screamed that she had been a fool. But the deeper, truer part of her, the part that still held Marco's memory and believed in the fundamental goodness of people, did not regret her kindness. It was a single, pure act in a life that had become compromised and complicated. It was hers. Meanwhile, Alessandro Valenti was a man transformed. The encounter with Elena had been a defibrillator to his dying soul. He sat in the back of a sleek, black car that had been waiting for him a block away from the trattoria. The city lights a blur of color through the tinted windows. The small wooden bird was clutched in his hand, a sacred relic. He had spent 6 months drowning in grief, and this stranger, this angel in a threadbare cardigan, had thrown him a lifeline. He felt a new purpose crystallizing within him, sharp and clear. His cynicism, a thick armor he had built around his shattered heart, began to crack. He would find her. He would repay her kindness not with a simple transaction, but with a tidal wave of salvation that would wash away all her suffering. He would become her hidden savior. He made a call to his head of security, a man accustomed to tracking corporate spies and hostile takeovers. The instructions were simple. Find the waitress from Trattoria di Sofia. Her name is Elena. I want to know everything. Her struggles, her debts, her fears. Everything. And you will be discreet. She must not know she is being watched. His voice was calm, but held a commanding undertone that had been dormant for months. He was awake again. The secret intervention began subtly. 2 days after her encounter with Alessandro, as Elena was frantically packing her few belongings into cardboard boxes, a crisp envelope was slipped under her door. Contained no note, only enough cash to cover 3 months' rent. She stared at the money, her hands trembling. Felt like a miracle, a divine reprieve. She gasped, tears of relief and confusion streaming down her pale cheeks. She ran to the landlord's office and paid him, the man's scowl replaced by a look of grudging respect. The next day, a delivery arrived from the city's most exclusive organic grocery store. Boxes and boxes of fresh food, produce, and pantry staples, enough to last for months. Tucked inside one of the bags was a large bottle of the exact medicine Leo needed, along with a top-of-the-line air purifier. The delivery slip simply said it was from the City Benevolence Fund, an organization she had never heard of. A soft, warm blanket, the color of cream, appeared on her doorstep that evening, wrapped in simple brown paper. Each anonymous act of kindness was a stitch, mending the torn fabric of her life. She was bewildered, overwhelmed, but a fragile seed of hope began to take root in the barren soil of her heart. She didn't know who her benefactor was, but she sent a silent prayer of thanks out into the universe. In a penthouse suite overlooking the city, Alessandro reviewed the daily reports from his security team, a quiet, satisfied smile touching his lips. He was her guardian angel, watching from the shadows, orchestrating her salvation. He was healing himself by healing her. A few weeks passed. Leo's health improved dramatically. The cough vanished, replaced by the bright, clear sound of his laughter. The apartment felt warmer, the pantry was full, and the specter of eviction was gone. Elena even received a small, anonymous raise at the restaurant, a gesture from the owner who claimed business had mysteriously picked up. She felt as though she could finally breathe. One sunny afternoon, she took Leo to a small park near their apartment. As Leo chased pigeons with joyous shrieks, Elena sat on a bench, her face tilted up to the golden glow of the sun. It was the first time she had felt genuinely peaceful in years. "Excuse me," the voice was quiet, familiar. She turned. It was him, the stranger from the restaurant. He looked different. The gaunt, haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet composure. He was clean-shaven, his hair was neatly cut, and he wore simple but well-fitting clothes. He still looked sad, but it was a softer, more integrated sadness, not the raw, open wound she had seen before. He held out his hand. In his palm lay the small wooden bird. "I believe this is yours," he said, a gentle smile in his eyes. "It seems to have done its job." Her heart thudded. She took the bird, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact sent a jolt of warmth through her. "I'm glad," she said, her voice a little breathless. He asked if he could sit down, and she nodded. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching Leo play. "My name is Alex," he said, offering the shortened, unassuming version of his name. "Elena," she replied. He didn't offer any explanation for his appearance that night at the restaurant, and she didn't ask. It felt like a sacred, unspoken secret between them. Instead, they talked about simple things. The weather, the beauty of the park, the surprising sweetness of the city's pigeons. There was an easy, natural chemistry between them, a connection forged in a moment of shared vulnerability. He asked about Leo, and she found herself opening up, talking about her son's recent illness and his miraculous recovery, about the mysterious gifts that had appeared out of nowhere. He listened with an unwavering, steady gaze that made her feel truly seen, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just listened. It was a profound gift. Their meetings in the park became a regular occurrence. It was the beginning of their bonding, a slow, gentle weaving together of two frayed lives. One afternoon, as a cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, the conversation deepened. They were in a quiet, safe space, the late afternoon sun casting a soft, amber hue over everything. The confession scene began not with a grand declaration, but with a quiet observation. "He has his father's eyes," Alex said, nodding toward Leo. Elena's breath caught. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He does," and then the story of Marco poured out of her. She spoke of their love, of the sudden, splintering shock of his death, of the crushing loneliness and the daily struggle. She confessed her fears of failing as a mother, of not being enough for Leo. It was a vulnerable monologue, the unburdening of a soul that had carried its grief in silence for too long. Alex didn't interrupt. He listened with that same profound, steady attention, his eyes reflecting her pain. When she finished, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. He didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," instead. He reached over and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a simple, grounding gesture of solidarity. The warmth seeped through her thin shirt, a moment of gentle, non-romantic physical contact. It anchored her. Then it was his turn. He looked out across the park, his gaze distant. "I know that silence," he said, his voice low and raw. "The silence in the house after they're gone." He then reciprocated, sharing his own tragedy. He told her about Sophia, his wife, an artist with a laugh like wind chimes, and Lily, their daughter, a whirlwind of bright energy and mismatched socks. He spoke of the accident, the sterile silence of the hospital, the cavernous emptiness of his life afterward. He didn't mention his wealth or his power. He spoke only as a husband and a father who had lost his entire world. He confessed the profound loneliness, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. They were two survivors, adrift on the same sea of grief, who had found a life raft in each other. Their shared tragedy forged an undeniable bond, a connection far deeper than simple attraction. In that moment, they were not a billionaire and a waitress. They were just Alex and Elena, two souls who understood each other's deepest wounds. The scene ended not with a resolution, but with a shared, unspoken understanding. He had given her financial security anonymously, but here, in the open, he was giving her something far more valuable: emotional healing. They were a perfect match. The climax was brewing, an inevitable storm on the horizon. The antagonist, Isabella, had not been idle. She had been watching Elena from afar, her heart hardening with every sign of Elena's improving fortunes. The paid-up rent, the healthy glow on Leo's cheeks, the new, better-paying job Elena had mysteriously been offered at a more upscale restaurant downtown. A job Alex had, of course, arranged through a third party. To Isabella, this wasn't a sign of Elena's resilience. It was a sign of her deceit. She was convinced Elena had a secret benefactor, a lover, and was using her son as a pawn to secure a comfortable life. It was a narrative that fed her own bitterness and absolved her of any guilt for her cruelty. She decided it was time to act, to expose Elena for the fraud she believed her to be. She chose her stage carefully. The new restaurant, during the busy Friday evening service. A place of intense public scrutiny. It would be the perfect setting for a scene of public humiliation. The perfect stage for her to stake her claim on her grandson. She was a foil, a plot device, a personification of cruel elitism, and her moment had come. That Friday the restaurant was buzzing. The air was filled with the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversations, and the scent of expensive perfume and fine food. Elena moved through the chaos with a newfound confidence. Her uniform was crisp, her movements efficient. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of a future that wasn't defined by struggle. Alex was supposed to meet her after her shift. The thought of their quiet walk home was a warm promise she held close to her heart. Then, the door opened, and a chill snaked through the room. Isabella stood there, her expression a mask of cold fury, her presence sucking all the warmth from the air. She strode directly to the center of the dining room, her heels clicking sharply on the polished marble floor. "Elena," she called out, her voice carrying across the room, silencing conversations. Every head turned. The humiliation began. "Still playing the poor, grieving widow, I see," Isabella sneered, her eyes scanning Elena's neat uniform with contempt. "How touching. But we both know the truth, don't we? We know how you're suddenly affording all this." Elena froze, a tray of glasses trembling in her hand. Her face went pale. She remained dignified, her back straight, but her eyes were wide with shock and fear. She was visibly overwhelmed. "You are an unfit mother." Isabella's voice rose, sharp and accusatory. Living in squalor one day, mysteriously flush with cash the next. You're using my grandson, my blood, to manipulate some man you've ensnared. You think I'll let Marco's son be raised by a common grifter? A waitress. Each word was a poisoned dart. The diners watched, some with pity, most with morbid curiosity. Elena's world, so carefully and fragilely rebuilt, was shattering around her. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Her throat tightened, and she couldn't find her voice to defend herself. The shame was a physical, biting cold, far worse than any poverty she had endured. All she could do was stand there, exposed and broken. The moment stretched into an unbearable eternity. Just as a single tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek, a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension. That is enough. The hidden savior made his dramatic entrance. Alessandro Valenti stood at the entrance of the restaurant. He was no longer Alex, the quiet man from the park. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit, his posture exuding an aura of effortless power. His eyes, fixed on Isabella, were like chips of ice. Behind him, through the glass doors, a sleek, gleaming black sedan waited at the curb, its driver standing at attention. The power dynamic in the room shifted seismically. Alessandro walked calmly through the silent, parted crowd, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. He stopped beside Elena, placing a steadying hand on her arm. He didn't look at her, but she felt a current of strength flow from his touch. He faced Isabella, his expression unreadable but utterly commanding. The powerful monologue began. "My name is Alessandro Valenti," he said, his voice quiet but echoing in the cavernous silence. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. The name was legendary. Isabella's face, a moment ago so full of triumphant cruelty, faltered, her arrogance collapsing into confusion and fear. "And you," he continued, his gaze pinning her in place, "are mistaken. Elena is not a grifter. She is the most profoundly decent and selfless human being I have ever had the privilege of knowing." He then revealed his identity and power, not with a shout, but with a series of quiet, devastating truths. "Several months ago, I was a broken man. I had lost everything that mattered to me. I had nothing. One night, I walked into a small restaurant, unable to pay for my meal. This woman," he said, his voice softening as he gestured to Elena, "paid for my food with the last of her own money. Money she desperately needed for her sick child. She asked for nothing in return. She gave me kindness when I had forgotten what it felt like. She gave me hope when I had none." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He held up his hand, revealing the small, worn wooden bird. "She gave me this, a symbol of her own loss to ease mine. That single, pure act of goodness saved my life." He turned his icy gaze back to Isabella. "Everything Elena has, her paid rent, her son's health, this very job, it came from me. Not as payment, but as a hopelessly inadequate attempt to repay a debt that can never truly be settled. She is not an unfit mother. She is a paragon of virtue. And you dare to stand here, in your soulless entitlement, and humiliate her." His voice dropped to a near whisper, but it was more menacing than any shout. "Your family's company, DeLucci Textiles, has been seeking a partnership with Valenti Corp for 2 years. Consider that negotiation permanently terminated. I will also be having a conversation with the board of the Children's Charity Foundation, of which you are a prominent member. I'm not sure they'll appreciate their public face behaving with such viciousness. You will not speak to Elena again. You will not come near her or her son again. Am I clear?" He had publicly offered his protection, his wealth, his status, and completely reversed the power dynamic. Isabella stood, speechless, her face ashen. She had been publicly and comprehensively annihilated. He had left the antagonist utterly shattered. He then turned to Elena, his eyes now filled with a tender, raw emotion. "Come," he said softly. "Let's go home." Total silence. The resolution and romantic fulfillment followed swiftly, in the quiet sanctuary he had created for her. He led her from the restaurant, his arms securely around her, shielding her from the curious stares. His car whisked them away from the scene of her trauma and into the serene quiet of the night. He didn't take her to her small apartment. Instead, they drove to a stately, beautiful townhouse on a quiet, tree-lined street. "I bought this for you," he said simply as he led her inside. "For you and Leo. A place to be safe." The interior was warm and inviting, furnished with a gentle, understated elegance. Felt like a home, not a palace. They stood in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. This was their new, safe, dimly lit space. The adrenaline from the confrontation drained away, leaving Elena feeling shaky and overwhelmed. He led her to a soft armchair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Now he confessed everything. He told her his full name, about his company, about the immense wealth he had never mentioned. He explained how he had orchestrated the anonymous gifts, the new job, everything. "I wanted to give you back the security the world had stolen from you," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was a coward. I was afraid that if you knew who I was, you would see the money, not the man. The man you saved." Tears streamed down her face. Tears of shock, of relief, of a dawning, unbelievable joy. You did all that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking with vulnerability. "When I met you, I was dead inside. My heart was a shattered ruin. Your kindness, it was the first ray of light in a long, dark night. You rebuilt me piece by piece. Watching you, protecting you, it gave me a purpose. It healed me." He paused, his grip on her hands tightening. "This isn't just about gratitude anymore. I've fallen in love with you. Not because you are a virtuous sufferer who needed saving, but because of the incredible, unwavering strength of your heart. I love your quiet dignity, your gentle soul, your fierce love for your son. I love you, Elena." It was a profound, romantic declaration. He offered her not just a life of security, but his entire, mended heart. He was offering her and Leo a family. She looked into his eyes, and she saw not a billionaire, not a savior, but Alex. The kind, sad man from the park who understood her sorrow. The man who had listened. The man who saw her. Disbelief gave way to a deep, cathartic certainty. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling more true than anything she had ever said. He rose and gently pulled her to her feet, wrapping her in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time since Marco's death, she felt completely, utterly safe. Hope bloomed into undeniable love. The epilogue, a year later, was a portrait of idyllic, hard-won peace. The scene opened on a sun-drenched garden, alive with the buzz of bees and the scent of roses. The stately townhouse had been transformed into a vibrant family home. Leo, now a healthy, boisterous 6-year-old, chased a golden retriever across a manicured lawn, his laughter echoing in the warm air. He was no longer a pale, fragile boy, but a picture of health and happiness. Elena sat on a wide porch swing, a gentle smile on her face. She was radiant, the haunted look in her eyes replaced by a deep, serene contentment. The threadbare cardigan was long gone, replaced by a simple, elegant summer dress. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. Alessandro came out of the house, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. The commanding aura of the CEO was softened, replaced by the easy contentment of a husband and father. The deep, unresolved grief that had once defined him was gone, the hollow spaces in his heart filled with a new, vibrant love. He was no longer haunted. He sat beside Elena on the swing, handing her a glass. He wrapped an arm around her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. Their perfect, idyllic life was a testament to the healing power of their connection. He kissed the top of her head. "Happy anniversary," he whispered. "Anniversary of what?" she asked, smiling. "Of the day a goddess in a waitress uniform saved me with a bowl of pasta and a wooden bird." She chuckled, a soft, happy sound. "That bird is in a glass case on your desk. I think that's a bit much," "It's a sacred object," he said with mock seriousness. The cornerstone of the Valenti Empire. They swung in a comfortable silence, watching their son play. The quiet was filled with unspoken love and gratitude. Elena placed a hand on her own gently rounded stomach. "She's kicking," she said softly. Alessandro's face lit up with a joy so pure it was breathtaking. He knelt before her again, just as he had a year ago, but this time he placed a tender hand on her belly, his eyes glistening with happy tears. A new baby, a new life, a symbol of their complete and total healing. They were a family, forged not in boardrooms or high society, but in a moment of selfless kindness in a rain-swept trattoria. Their happily ever after was not an ending, but a beautiful, sunlit beginning. They had found their security and love. This story is a simple fable, a testament to the idea that a single act of kindness can echo through the universe, returning to us in ways we can never predict. It is a reminder that in a world that often feels transactional and cold, the purest currency we possess is the selfless compassion we show to a stranger. Elena's quiet sacrifice, born of a pure heart, did not just save a man's spirit. It created a tidal wave of goodness that washed away her own suffering, building a new world for her and her son on a foundation of love and gratitude. If this story touched your heart, it's because it speaks to a deep and universal truth, that the light we shine for others has a way of illuminating our own path. It's a message of hope, a belief that even in our darkest moments of desperation, the choice to be kind is the most powerful choice we can make. It is a promise that goodness is never wasted and that the heart, no matter how shattered, can be healed by the tender touch of another. We invite you to keep this feeling alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories that celebrate the power of the human heart. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these inspiring narratives of hope, redemption, and the undeniable magic of selfless love. We'll see you in the next one.